The early 1970s fuel crisis is usually associated with America. Huge engines, lines at gas stations, and the sudden end of the era of gas-guzzling road giants. But in Europe, the crisis also changed the market in a major way. Small, economical cars were no longer just cheap transportation. They became one of the most important segments of the decade. The Fiat 127 and the Renault 5 had already taken strong positions. Volkswagen launched the Polo. Ford answered with the Fiesta. Opel was in no hurry. For a long time, the Kadett remained the brand's smallest mainstream car. But by the standards of this new segment, it was already more like an older sibling than a true small city car. Only in 1982 did Opel finally introduce the Corsa. It arrived late, cautiously, and without a loud revolution. But this little car became one of the most important European superminis of the 1980s. Today, we will look at how Opel was late to the class of small front-wheel drive cars, but still managed to hit the mark. Even before the war, Opel's lineup included small two-door cars, the best known of which were the Olympia and the Kadett. Both the Olympia and the Kadett continued their lives after the German auto industry had recovered from the war and stopped building funny little bubble cars like the BMW Isetta. By the 1960s, these cars were perfectly respectable products of their time, with clear American styling influence and a conventional rear-wheel drive chassis. The Kadett kept this layout all the way to the end of the 1970s, even as more and more European competitors were already moving to front-wheel drive. Traditionally, Opel focused on more familiar and more profitable classes. The brand was strong in family cars, mid-size cars, and larger models. The supermini segment did not look like a major priority for Opel for a long time. A small, cheap car brought lower margins and required high volumes. Before the arrival of the Corsa, the Kadett was Opel's most affordable mainstream car. By the 1970s, it had already grown into a proper compact family car, while the market began to demand something from the class below: cheaper, shorter, and more economical. Opel still seemed to think in 1960s terms, when the Kadett really was a small car, even though by the end of the 1970s, it had become more of a rival to the Golf, the Escort, and other European compacts. But no matter how long Opel resisted, the new era was changing the rules, especially after its main rival from Wolfsburg introduced the closely related Audi 50 and Volkswagen Polo. So it was no surprise that Rüsselsheim finally began work on its own small front-wheel drive model. The development itself was not especially unusual, because by that point, the formula for such a car had already become familiar: a rational body with maximum use of interior space, a compact arrangement of components, modern design, a two-box hatchback shape, and front-wheel drive. The more interesting part was something else. Even at the design stage, it was decided that the Corsa would not be built in Germany. Production would be set up in Spain, at a factory built specifically for this model near Zaragoza. For Spain, this plant was very important. A huge industrial site meant jobs, technology, and regional development, so the state supported the project with subsidies and official loans. For Opel and General Motors, the Spanish site offered the main advantage: lower production costs. In this class, price was almost decisive, and building the Corsa in Germany would have made the small Opel too expensive compared with its competitors. Production of the Corsa began on August 30th, 1982. In 1983, the car was officially shown at the Paris Motor Show. The Corsa's design, created by Erhard Schnell, was defined by a large glass area and minimalist detailing. No unnecessary decoration, simple plastic bumpers, and a large radiator grille with Opel's traditional lightning bolt badge. With a wheelbase of 2.34 meters and a body length ranging from 3.62 to 3.96 meters, depending on the version, the Corsa was almost ideal for the narrow streets of European cities. That is why it was first launched in Italy, France, and Spain, countries where compact size had always been especially important. Across the English Channel, the model also quickly became familiar, but under a different name: the Vauxhall Nova. There was one amusing detail. Today it sounds a little strange, but at the time many people saw the Corsa's design as rather aggressive. It had swollen wheel arches, sharp lines, and an almost rally-like stance. What could possibly be aggressive about a little car whose engine range started with a 1-liter, 45 horsepower four-cylinder? The other gasoline engines, with displacements from 1.2 to 1.4 liters, were a little more powerful, producing between 55 and 75 horsepower. The basic 1-liter version needed about 20 seconds to reach 100 kilometers per hour, while the more powerful versions took around 15 to 16 seconds, which was quite acceptable for the time. And the surprisingly bold design clearly worked in the Corsa's favor. Buyers liked the fact that their small car did not look like a modest utilitarian box. Instead, it stood out among other small hatchbacks with its swollen arches and more assertive appearance. This brings us to another distinctive feature of the model. Besides the three-door hatchback that was traditional for this class, the Corsa A was also offered from the start as a two-door TR sedan. For a supermini, this was a fairly unusual body style. But Opel was trying to cover different markets with one model. In some places, buyers wanted a practical hatchback. In others, a small sedan still seemed like a more solid and familiar car. This was especially important for Southern Europe and some export markets. Later, a 5-door hatchback and a 4-door sedan were added as well. As for trim levels, besides the basic Corsa, buyers were offered the Corsa Luxus, Corsa Berlina, and the sporty Corsa SR. But in 1987, the swollen arches and aggressive appearance finally matched the hardware. That was when the Corsa GS1 appeared, with a 1.6-liter, 100-horsepower engine. For a car with a curb weight of around 820 kilograms, this was a serious advantage. This Corsa could accelerate to 100 kilometers per hour in less than 10 seconds and reach almost 190 kilometers per hour. It was no longer just a small city car with a bold appearance. It was a proper entry into the class of small, hot hatchbacks. Almost at the same time as the hot Corsa, there was also a version for buyers who cared more about fuel economy. A model with a 1.5-liter, 67-horsepower Isuzu diesel. In practice, the Corsa gave buyers a wide choice, from a simple, economical car to a small hatchback with genuinely serious performance. The rarest, sporty version of the first generation was not an Opel Corsa, but its British relative, the Vauxhall Nova Sport. This model was released in 1985 for homologation in the British Rally Championship, in the Group A class up to 1,300 cubic centimeters. All of these cars were white and had distinctive vinyl decals. Under the hood was a 13 SB engine with Weber carburetors, a non-standard camshaft, and a different exhaust system. As a result, power rose to 93 horsepower, top speed reached about 180 kilometers per hour, and acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour took around 9 seconds. It really is one of the rarest versions of the Corsa family. Only 500 examples were built for homologation. Another important detail was the styling. When the Corsa debuted in 1982, it looked in many ways like a smaller version of the Cadet. But just 2 years later, in 1984, a new generation of the Cadet appeared, designed in a completely different style, smoother, more aerodynamic, and more modern. After the arrival of the new Cadet and the gradual renewal of Opel's entire lineup, the little Corsa suddenly became almost the most traditional and conservative model in the brand's range. For a city car, that is not always a good thing. A car that looked bold and fresh at launch began to seem outdated rather quickly next to newer Opel models. So in 1990, the Corsa received a major exterior update. The front end was changed, with new bumpers, a different radiator grille, and narrower headlights. As a result, the new face made the model look much more modern and stopped it from looking outdated next to the rest of the Opel lineup. But if we return to the start of sales, the main point was something else. Despite arriving late, the first-generation Corsa did not become a trailing outsider. It became a serious European hit. There were several reasons for this. First, Opel's Spanish bet really worked. The Corsa's price was more than competitive. At the same time, the Zaragoza plant had been built from the beginning as a proper modern facility for Opel and General Motors, so Spanish assembly was not seen as second-rate. The Corsa remained a normal Opel, inexpensive, simple, but solid for its class. The brand itself also played a role. Opel was already well known to European buyers and had a stable reputation. So, for many people, it was easier to choose a small Opel than a less familiar alternative. The earlier competitors also helped prepare the market. Fiat, Renault, Volkswagen, and Ford were not only selling their own models, they were also teaching Europeans to accept the very idea of a small, front-wheel drive car. Finally, Opel quickly expanded the choice of versions. The Corsa was offered with different engines, trim levels, and body styles, allowing one model to work for several audiences and several markets at once. In the end, during the production run of the first generation, from 1982 to 1993, about 3.1 million Corsa A cars were built. For a model that arrived later than its main competitors, this was not just a good result. It was a real success. More than 40 years have passed since the debut of the first Opel Corsa, but this little car is still loved by fans in dozens of countries. Opel itself has not forgotten it either. For the model's 40th anniversary, the company created a limited 40 years edition based on the modern 6th-generation Corsa. Each of the 1982 examples was painted in the original record red color and received a numbered plaque. The interior also received retro-inspired details that referred back to the first Corsa A. And this is a rather touching sign of respect for the company's own history, especially today, when many manufacturers easily forget even the models that once helped make their name.